So our first speaker is from the USA, and bear in mind this time next year there's going to be another president of the United States, so that's going to be interesting. But he's going to talk about the fundamentals of biological agriculture, benefits to farming, food, and the ecosystem. So please welcome to stage Dan Kittridge.
All right. Great to be back. I have some nice familiar faces here. My name's Dan Kittridge, for those who don't know me. I may be responsible for us getting started a bit late. I apologize for that. I'm going to jump into a little bit of background and then a few slides, and looking forward to the Q&A, and then more time as well tomorrow. Personally, I come from an organic farming background. Grew up on an organic farm, mixed farm in New England, Massachusetts. Vegetables, animals, fruit trees, pasture, CSA, farmers markets, things like that. As I grew up and started farming myself, I realized that I, like a lot of farmers, couldn't make a living. I'm not sure if anybody else is here familiar with that experience of working all the time and not making a living. But I'd been taught that we were better people because we were organic. I got to thinking about the fact that it seemed because our plants were attacked by insects and disease, that was part of why we weren't able to make a living. And I thought if we were better people, then our plants shouldn't be being eaten alive. So that was a bit of cognitive dissonance there for me. I ended up at the Acres USA conference, I think it was 2006, 2007. There's a bunch of brilliant books out there in the back for those who haven't yet perused them. And really was exposed to a much broader perspective than the organic orthodoxy, the sort of biological ag perspective, which I think it's wonderful that this conference is called BioFarm. It's not regenerative, it's not organic, it's not permaculture, it's biological, it's life, because life is actually the foundation of what's going on here. And it was the insights that I picked up at Acres and through reading the books, et cetera, that was what empowered me to be able to, through a few minor modulations, get to a point where I could make a living farming working part-time as opposed to not making a living working time and a half. And so started an educational organization in 2010, focusing on educating people about these principles. I call them principles of biological systems. I'm going to cover a few of the basics here this morning, but it's just sort of how did nature evolve the system to work? Because most of us here are probably familiar with the fact that plants have been growing for a little over 400 million years. People familiar with that concept, right? I like to say, on which of the first 6 days did God invent fertilizer? There's been a long time that plants have been growing just fine without fertilizer being applied, without insecticides, fungicides, et cetera, being applied. So if we can step back from our hubris of the sort of the Western cultural framework and think about how did nature evolve the system to work? How have indigenous cultures globally been able to manage at a continent scale ecosystems to maximize productivity and fecundity with no plow, with no beast of burden, with no inputs? Perhaps we could get to a point where we could be applying a much lighter touch and having a much greater result. So if that all sort of follows conceptually, there's a few basic points I want to make here this morning to hopefully set the stage for the conversation. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the research we've been doing from a nutritional standpoint, which we think is what will help drive, from an economic standpoint, the solutions and inspiration for farmers. So the first thing, from a principle standpoint, is most plants are green. Most people will grant that point. Most of the year, right? Around here, it seems like most of the year, almost the entire year, things are green. Where I come from, things turn brown for a while around this time of year. But the reason that plants are green is because they were evolved by the microbes that were in the ocean to feed them, right? The microbes wanted, anybody know about this evolutionary biology? Who came first? The microbes evolved the plants. The microbes evolved the humans too. The microbes said, we need someone to feed us, and so they evolved plants. They said, we need someone to reproduce us and carry us around the ecosystem and spread us, and so they evolved animals. You know how this all worked? Anybody know how this worked? Right? What percentage of the cells in your body are human? Anybody? Less than 10% of the cells in your body are human. 90+% of the cells in your body are not human. That means they're bacterial, they're fungal. In the States, I'm not sure if you guys have these identity conversations here in Ireland, but we have this whole identity conversation. And are you a man, are you a woman, are you a thee, or a she, or a black, or a brown, or a purple, or orange? I say, the first question is, are you a human? Because if 90% of your cells are not human, you're something more than just an animal. I would say you're an ecosystem. I would say you're a symbiotic ecosystem. Like, we understand that we need the microbes in our gut for us to be able to digest food, for us to be able to live, right? The colostrum that comes out of the mother's breast, whether it's a human or a cow at birth, is there to establish the gut flora, which is foundational for digestion, which is foundational for life. When a calf does not get colostrum, it bawls and then dies. Anybody here ever had that experience? You know what the sound of a bawling calf is that didn't get its colostrum? I'm guessing a few people here do. It's kind of the sound of a crying baby, a colicky baby. A colicky baby is one whose gut flora is not well established. We are not evolved to digest our food. It's only when the bottom of the food chain is functioning well that we can function well. It's exactly the same with plants. Plants cannot digest the soil. They were evolved by the microbes to manufacture sugar, to feed the microbes, who then digest the soil and feed the plants. That's how it's been going for hundreds of millions of years. Only when you understand that that's how nature evolved the system to work, can you thoughtfully and sensitively, with a gentle touch, support that process. If you think your job is to get in there and till and plow and apply things, I would say maybe you're missing the point. Understand how nature evolved the system to work and then work in harmony with it. So if you'll grant my point that the microbes are the bottom of the food chain, and it's only when the bottom of the food chain is functioning well that the middle of the food chain is functioning well, we'll call the middle the plants, and only when the middle is functioning well that the top is functioning well, we'll call the top the animals, then the whole priority of farming, I would suggest, is about creating a dynamic where the bottom of the food chain is flourishing. And it's actually really simple, right? Microbes, they, like a few of the rest of us, need air to breathe. So if your soil is tight, or your soil is waterlogged, and there's no oxygen in it, they can't breathe. When they can't breathe, they die. When they die, the plant stops being fed. So managing your soil in such a fashion as to ensure you have sufficient aeration at all points in time is a foundational environmental condition for system function. So if you've got subsoil compaction at, do you guys do centimeters or inches here? Yes. Both. Okay, you guys, yeah, not too long ago they got transitioned over. So we do inches. So, if you can't stick your hand down into the soil maybe more than 2 or 3 inches, if it's really tight, if it gets deep underneath your fingernails, imagine there's not much air moving up and down, and so that compaction actually is your limiting factor for overall system function. To the degree at which air can flow in the soil is the degree to which microbes can breathe, is the degree to which the plant can be fed. So the deeper the aerobic zone, the greater the foundational capacity for life to function. There's all kinds of techniques, which I don't have time to get into here today, about all the things I'm about to talk about. I am coming back in February and then in April to do a longer form course as well. I run an NGO where all of our presentations are online for free, so hopefully this is just a teaser which can inspire you to deepen your knowledge. But air is a critical environmental condition, and so the management practices that you engage in which inhibit air from being present are counterproductive. Water, obviously. Water is also critical for life to function, and so maybe that's not such an issue here, although at certain points in time, I guess you maybe do have 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks without rain or not much rain. Wherever the soil is dry, for whatever reason, the microbes die, right? People think about watering their gardens, and then when they think about watering their gardens, they think about watering their plants. And so they take the hose and they water it at the point where the tomato stem hits the ground. But that tomato, as above, so below, if it's a 4 or 5 foot tall tomato plant, 3 or 4 feet across, think about the root zone going out that far into the soil, and think about the fact that The plant's making sugar in those green leaves, which is then being injected into the soil through those roots to feed the microbes who are then digesting the soil and feeding it back up to the plant. If you've got a little wet spot and a bunch of dry around it, then 95% of your microbes have died, then that means your plant's only getting fed 5% of what it needs. I like to think about sort of the shift in paradigm from animal consciousness to a plant consciousness, and in many cases they're remarkably similar. If anybody's ever had the experience of being around a pregnant animal, whether it's a human or a cow, you might have the understanding about the critical importance of that mother being fed well, right? If she does not get what she needs for a fairly small period of time, things can fall apart rapidly. Was that said politely enough? People get the basic concept? Think about a tomato plant that's filling fruit as a pregnant mother. Think of her as, doing everything she can, and in fact, in many cases, sucking the life force out of her lower leaves, literally the nutrients out of the lower leaves to fill the fruit, right? Those diseases we sometimes call diseases of the bottom leaves turning yellow and turning brown and falling off is really just the same thing as a mother sucking the calcium out of her teeth to build a baby, right? So we have this whole dynamic going on where any of these environmental conditions that are causing things to not function well, like you don't have enough water, your soil's not maintained, moisture's not maintained everywhere, it's only you have insufficient levels, so the plant is not being fed sufficiently, so she's literally sacrificing her body to feed her babies. Maybe she'll squeeze out 1 or 2 babies, but she's probably gonna end up dying sooner than she would have. So air and water, right? These are not complicated ingredients, and in most cases, you're not gonna be buying them from a fertilizer salesman, so they're not gonna be educating you about the critical importance of them, but they are foundationally important. Food, air, water, food, anybody think? Okay, we've got basics here, right? When you have bare soil, say in the wintertime, you have people do that, they grow wheat or things like that, crops, and they plow the soil bare in the winter. During the summertime, when the plants are green and they're making sugar and they're feeding the microbes in the soil, great, all things are going well, the microbes are being fed through that sort of liquid carbon pathway. When you have bare soil, when you have nothing green making sugar and feeding soil life, then they're not being fed. Like where I grew up in Massachusetts, it gets cold. When I was a kid, the ground would freeze in November, snow would set in, depending on the winter, any point in time, 1, 2, 3 feet of snow on the ground. By the end of March, the snow thaws out. By the beginning of April, the ground thaws out, and we're back to things starting to grow again. But we didn't harvest tomatoes and peppers and apples and lettuce, etc., in December and January. We had all that stuff stockpiled. We have a root cellar with potatoes and carrots and beets. We had onions and garlic hanging in, and we had tomatoes canned. We had vegetables and meat and fruit in the freezers. We stockpiled our food in the winter because we weren't harvesting it fresh. Because we need to eat every day. Well, microbes need to eat every day too. And so if you don't maintain an environment where there's food for them all the days of the year, then they're going to starve to death. So bare soil is no food, right? The microbes don't fly off to, what do you guys have, Ibiza or something like that, Portugal in the summertime, in the wintertime, right? They don't fly down to live on the beach. They stay in situ. So you have to maintain cover on the soil at all points in time, right? When the green leaves aren't photosynthesizing, it's the brown leaves, it's the dead leaves, that's the stockpile. The organic matter stockpile in the soil is what the microbes will eat to keep themselves alive. Right now, going into the winter, I'm looking at my fields, I'm looking at some areas where there's not a lot of cover in that soil. And I know by January that what little cover is there is going to be gone because the microbes are going to keep eating. And if I don't take some round bales of hay and roll them out over that field, my microbes are going to be dead by April. And I'm going to try to plant crops into dirt, not soil. We just planted garlic a couple days ago. Anybody here plant garlic? You guys do garlic? Right. I use this as an example to talk about the topic of food. say it's October and you've picked your carrots. I'll use vegetables as an example because I grew up on a farm where we mostly grow vegetables. We certainly had cows and things like that, but not many. So you got a 1/4 acre of carrots, and it's October, and you're picking them. Some go in the root cellar, some go to whoever you're selling them to, and you plant back into that 1/8 of an acre of garlic. 1/8 of an acre is only half of a quarter of an acre. So we plant the garlic, we put the mulch down. That's how you do it. You put it in, you put the mulch down. Ground freezes, snow comes, springtime, snow melts, ground thaws out. If you take your hand and you reach down underneath that hay and you pick up a handful of that soil, you can smell it, right? It smells like soil. You can pick it up. You can pick up a handful of it. You'll probably find a bunch of worm castings in there. Directly adjacent in that half of that section, that 1/8 of an acre that didn't get garlic planted, where it was left bare because it was too late to put cover crops in, by April, that ground is tight and hard and cracked. You can't fit your hands into it. Right? Anybody know about this? Had this experience? That's dirt. Dirt is the stuff that doesn't have any structure, that you can't fit your hands into, that doesn't have an aroma, that you put seeds into and they don't grow. Right? So the only thing different between the area where we planted the garlic and the area where we didn't plant the garlic, from the perspective of the microbes, was in one spot they had food, and the other spot they didn't. And so over here where they had food, that's soil in the spring. In this spot over here where they didn't, that's dirt in the spring. Because you got to think about, from the perspective of the microbes, they need food all the time. I say, people have heard about this thing, what would Jesus do? Do you guys have evangelicals here in Ireland? No, we don't have any evangelicals. We had this whole thing with evangelicals, Christians, and there was like a bumper sticker. It says, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And that's supposed to inspire you. I like to say, what does nature do? How does nature do it? Like, where in nature do you see bare soil? Not where she's doing well. And so anytime you're managing the land in such a fashion as to create bare soil, I would say you're violating nature. And foundationally, what you're doing is creating a dynamic where the microbes are dying off, and that's short-circuiting your entire system, right? Where you violate nature is where you start to have problems, and you lose economic viability. You start buying things. You start spiraling down the toilet bowl. So air, water, food, these are not complicated things. In most cases, they're not things you're buying from people, which is why you've not necessarily been told about them. Doesn't mean they're not really important. Minerals is the next one I like to talk about. In many cases, soils have been farmed for generations, centuries, in this case, potentially millennia. I'm not sure how long people have been farming in Ireland for, but I think it's quite some time. 6,000 years? Yeah, it's thousands of years. And farming is not necessarily a good way to treat the soil, right? When you till it up and you leave it bare and it rains and things get leached out, like there's these things called anions, like boron and molybdenum and sulfur. And those are elements that leach out of the soil when it rains. So they'll be present maybe in a parent material in like a climax forest or a complex, well-functioning ecosystem. But if you till that ground up year over year and it rains like it does here, those minerals get leached into the subsoil, and they're no longer present, and they're critical for life to exist, right? There are dozens of different elements that are required for us to exist in our bodies, also are critical for microbes to exist. There's this one little one called cobalt I'd like to talk about at the center of a compound called B12. People may have heard about B12. Those who are vegans or vegetarians are sometimes told by their medical practitioners that they need to supplement their diet with B12, a shot or a pill, because there's not enough B12 in a plant-based diet. It's a long, complicated conversation, and I don't have time for it here in this presentation, but the basic point is, at the center of every compound called B12 is one atom of cobalt. And effectively, if you don't have enough B12 in your body, you're dead. And it's not the amino acids that are attached to the cobalt that are the limiting factor, it's the cobalt actually. So effectively, if you don't have enough cobalt in your body, you're dead. Like, that's not just one of many elements, right? Molybdenum and chromium and vanadium, and not just copper and zinc and calcium and potassium. Actually, biological systems use a broad suite of different elements to exist. They're like our building blocks out of which we build everything. It's a long conversation with chemistry and biochemistry. But the upshot is mineral deficiencies are limiting factors in overall system function. If you don't have enough cobalt in your soil, 80% of the species of soil life are B12 dependent. So 80% of the species need B12 to be present to exist. So you can have air and water and food, but if you don't have any cobalt, they can't exist. It's a limiting factor. So addressing mineral deficiencies, which in many cases is as rudimentary as finely ground up rock dust, like basalt or granite, or even sea salt, right? The oceans are made out of seawater. The continents are made out of rock. I'm not saying you need to go buy something expensive from anybody. I'm saying there are some really rudimentarily, naturally occurring raw materials that we can access for $2 a ton or $5 a ton or maybe $100 a ton in the form of sea salt. That would be an expensive one, right? Basalt, $2, $5, $10 a ton, where we can systemically address mineral deficiencies, which are limiting factors due to the fact that our lands have been treated with agriculture for quite some time, and in many cases are mineral deficient. So air, water, food, minerals. The last one I like to talk about is life itself. The microbes themselves must be present. In many cases, if chemicals have been applied, if whatever the historical dynamics are by which the land has been treated, the full spectrum of microbiology is not present. There's millions upon millions of different species. We don't even have names for 95% of them, right? The vast majority of the species of life in the soil don't even have names yet from the perspective of a microbiologist. It's like dark matter and dark energy. It's like we don't really know, except we know there's a whole bunch out there. What we do know is when you apply herbicides, when you apply fungicides, when you apply insecticides, et cetera, you destroy these organisms. And if you don't reestablish them, you should not expect them to be present. So like the colostrum I started off with, the cow has coming out of, before the milk comes out, the colostrum comes out. With the mother, before the milk comes out, the colostrum comes out. That's there to establish gut flora. That's the probiotic, prebiotic that is that full spectrum of microbes that must be present. Reestablishing microbes in the environment is also a critical component. These are sort of the 5 critical environmental conditions I like to talk about that are necessary for life to function, which in many cases we are not educated about. And if any one of them is not present, you should expect system function not to occur. So the way I think about farming is not like I'm trying to manage everything in extreme detail. I like to think about have I managed the environment to maintain aeration, to maintain hydration, to maintain food, to ensure sufficiency of these basic elements and microbes, and then I get out of the way. Because like trees in the forest, plants in the garden will grow by themselves without much hassle if they have the basics they need. And when they do that, then their yield goes up. Your cost of production goes down. Your economic viability goes up. And so that's been my experience as a farmer for quite some time now that I want to lay out. I think that the theme of this initial presentation was supposed to be these sort of principles of biological systems. Do I have time for a couple slides, or my 30 minutes is up?
I'll give you 4 minutes for slides.
4 minutes for slides. It may take 2 minutes to get my slides to work. Now my computer's a different color than it usually is. I'll just say we've been doing some research here as part of our organization to think about how we can inspire this shift to happen towards proper biological management, which does correlate with increased carbon sequestration, increased farm viability, increased nutrient levels for humans. And our thought is, due to the fact that chronic disease is getting to be epidemic, and people generally don't want to die, and certainly don't want to see their children die, and they know that something's wrong with the food, if we can help people differentiate between the carrot that's more nutritious and the carrot that's less nutritious, we think people will buy the carrots that are more nutritious off the shelf and leave the ones that are less nutritious. And that is an economic driver by which we can inspire people to focus on these broader ecological outcomes. because money talks in today's day and age. And so, a long story, I'll talk more about it at the end of the day tomorrow, but we've been doing a bunch of research since 2017 to identify nutrient variations in food, to connect that nutrient variation to soil health, and to build handheld sensors to give people the ability to flash a light, literally, with a, I got one here in my pocket. Like, this is our, I mean, we're just a nonprofit, so it's not fancy looking, but this is engineered to flash a light at a carrot, at zucchini, at mustard greens, at wheat berries, and get a reading spitting back on your smartphone saying 25 out of 100 or 80 out of 100, right? Because there is a nutritional variation in food. And what these slides are showing is how bad that is. So this is phosphorus in carrots. You see the 11 at the bottom, milligrams per 100 grams, and you see 93 at the top. What's that, 8-to-1 variation? 8-to-1, not 8%. This carrot has 8 times as much as that one, right? So you know how these graphs work? Like, the higher the bar goes, the more samples were in that line, right? The vast, and red is the lowest, and green is the highest. The vast majority of the samples of carrots we found were in this 20th to the 40th percentile of what's possible, right? It's possible to do well, but almost nobody is. Let's look at antioxidants here. Okay, antioxidants from 5 to 200. That's a 40 to 1x, 40 to 1 variation. The vast majority of the samples are in the bottom 40th percentile. Good is possible, but most people aren't doing it. Well, polyphenols from 2.5 to 50. That's a 20x variation. The vast majority of the samples were in the bottom 25th percentile. Sulfur, 8 to 33, we'll call that a 4x variation. Again, the vast majority of the samples are at the bottom of the curve. Almost all of what's available for people to eat is of poor caliber. Okay, now we're going to go down and see what caused it. This is mostly US here. Okay, we got the red, orange, yellow, light green, dark green, different parts of the country. Is any part of the country doing good and other parts bad? No, not really. Variety. Some people say it's variety. We got Napoli, we got Bolero, we got Nantes, we got Mokum. You can do bad with a variety, you can do well with a variety. It's not the soil type, it's not the plant type. Let's look at this one. The farm, or the grocery store, or the garden, or the farmer's market. None of those predict, right? You can get good stuff in the store, you can get bad stuff at the farmer's market. Practice, certified organic. Ooh, cover crops, no-till, tillage, local, biodynamic. The labels, the management practices, the identities, the certifications do not correlate to nutritional levels in food. You know what correlates? Respiration. The amount of breath happening of microbes in the soil. The more microbes are breathing, the more nutrients are in the food that's growing above them. End of conversation. So I'll stop right there. We'll do more talking tomorrow, but hopefully that was your time. As long as you want.
Where you want to? I'll go there. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
That was fascinating and terrifying. I always think on a simple level, you think you're being really good buying carrots or something for your dinner, and then you just don't realize the nutrient density could be appalling. It's terrifying.
It's better to eat.
So it should be. Put it as close as you can to your mouth.
It's better to eat carrots than Snickers bars.
Okay.
100%. Take God's natural created thing and eat that, and it's way better for you than processed product, which they call food, I call junk. So that's the first message here is, you can do better than is being done, but stop destroying what you start out with, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Do people have questions? Put up your hands and please introduce yourself first. And as succinct as possible, if that's all
very
right.
Succinct. Yeah. So, Christopher Upton from Zero Dig. I just want to pick up the point on micronutrients that you mentioned. And my question is, I'm getting lots of people trying to sell biostimulants, seaweed extracts, all this kind of stuff. But how do you know that you need any of these things? And how do you know which particular micronutrient is a limiting factor? Because the standard soil tests don't give you any of this kind of information.
That's a very good question. Foundationally, there's two ways of knowing. One is the Western rational empirical way of knowing, and one is the intuitive consciousness way of knowing. So I would say that, if you talk to people from other cultures, like historically around the planet, people from all over the planet have said, we humans have the ability to communicate directly with nature. In the West, we say that's not possible, that's hocus pocus. If you're a scientist and you got 15 cultural perspectives, and 14 say humans can communicate with nature, and one says humans can't, if you're a scientist, and you got 14 data points that line up over here, and one data point over there, you chuck the outlier. So I would just start with saying, from a foundational perspective, I'll answer your question from the Western rational side, but I would say the true answer, I think, is developing our capacities to communicate directly. And we'll just leave it there. We can talk more about it later if you want. So we have instruments for assessment, like a refractometer is a very simple, inexpensive tool you can use. Let the plants tell you, this is a way to communicate with the plants, is to apply the thing that you're being sold on a small amount of your crop and check it 2 days later and see if the Brix reading has gone up. There are ways in which you can discern through experimentation whether something's giving you a result or not. There's all kinds of plant sap analysis. It really is a fairly deep and long conversation, which is part of why I'm honored to be coming back to do 4 days this spring with Knots. But I do have a 2-day course online for free on YouTube, which maybe facilitate that. It's a long conversation, how to know what exactly you need. In many cases, we're being sold products by people who are trying to sell us products. And actually, you don't need them. So I'm a farmer first, and I'm a little bit perturbed by people always trying to sell me stuff. Like I said, indigenous cultures for a long time did an amazing job with no inputs purchased. We are in a situation where the environment and climate are in rough shape, and so we have a weaker system, and so supplements are beneficial. Some of them are, but being discerning and not spending a lot of money, I think, is really important.
Are there any other questions out there? I remember just on that, I was talking to someone recently, a farmer, and they said, in regard to our consumer society, that we think we have to consume and buy things all the time, we've forgotten we have a huge potential to create solutions for ourselves as well.
Yeah.
And that's something that's key. Were there any other questions down there? I think I saw a hand go up.
Yes,
Yep.
Louise Skelly from County Down. We recently had very bad flooding on our farm, and we have started on the regenerative process and had applied different things into our soils. And I just wondered, have you any view on what the impact of sudden flooding is on your soil? And
The impact of flooding on your soil?
yeah.
As long as it stays on your farm and doesn't get washed off, hopefully that was the case, is that you run out of oxygen. And so then therefore, immediately when your soils become waterlogged, there's no air in the soil for the microbes to breathe. And once they can't breathe, they asphyxiate. Once they asphyxiate, the plant's not being fed. So it is really quite a serious issue due to the fact that it shuts down that process of plants being able to be fed. There's a bunch of different techniques and strategies to address that kind of thing, to address subsoil compaction, to deal with swales and ponds.
What would you do if your soil had been flooded? What would be your go-to? Would you be spreading something on it afterwards? Would you be what would you do?
Every situation is case dependent. I'd have to see the land. I'd have to know how much water. I'd have to know how long.
I'm really opposed to one-size-fits-all solutions. I think every human has a different body with a different historical set of dynamics that have occurred to it, different genes, different nutrition, different stress hormones, different everything else. And so we can all experience a similar stressor and have it cause us to respond in different ways because of our unique historical situations. And so I try not to do sort of like simple answers because
Yeah, we'll drive you to County Down after this. It'll only take 5 hours.
I'm always happy to go and I'm here till tomorrow night. I'm actually here till Thursday morning. Happy to have side conversations and get into more detail. If I had more nuance of specifics, I'm happy to answer those questions. I'm here. Yeah.
I'm cracking the whip because we have about 4 minutes left. So there's another question over there. Over that.
Ned O'Brien. In the case of nutrient density, what part, the carrot, for argument's sake, has an eightfold factor of difference. When the government looks at a carrot and they tell us there's so much of stuff in the carrot, at what part of the spectrum are they saying? Are they say the normal carrot is down low, or are they looking at the high end carrot?
As in which part of the carrot?
Well, you said there's phosphorus, for argument's sake, was it an eightfold difference between one carrot and another carrot?
Yeah.
But when we're told by the government that carrots are good for you and they have X amount, where is their X sitting on that spectrum?
I could pull those graphs out for you if you'd like. Generally, where the peak of our graph is where the governmental agencies are telling you is what. Like, so I showed you that, the peaks were maybe at the 25th percentile. I've got a bunch of graphs which show what the USDA says is how much, copper's in a carrot and what our range showed. And we overlaid very nicely, actually, where the peak of the graph is with what the governmental agency says is in the carrot. I think the limiting factor in the governmental agency framework is that it conceives of all carrots as uniform, and that is foundationally not true. What's foundationally true is there's a very significant continuum of nutritional variation, and we should not think about our food as though it were number 2 plastic or number 1 plastic, right? Or like we have this concept of things being uniform, and perhaps in an industrial supply chain reality, when you're manufacturing things, you can cause them to be fairly uniform, but in biological systems have much more nuance and diversity in them. And so I think the foundational concept here is, like, as far as nutrient density is concerned, some carrots taste good. Oh, just one minor point. We are evolved with very sophisticated nutrient monitoring devices that are way more better than any technology anyone's going to build. It's called your nose and your tongue, right? A tomato tastes good. It's got high levels of nutrients in it. A tomato does not taste good. It's got low levels of nutrients in it, right? It's that simple. But the way the governmental frameworks have been set up is to try to simplify it and say this is the average, and then therefore this is what everything is. And it's actually fallacious. It's not true.
I think one of the beautiful things about BioFarm is that we leave time for people to chat to you individually after this, and I'm aware that while there's a few more questions, maybe they can come to you at the break. Would that be all right?
I generally like to hang out in the back and talk
There
to
you go.
people. I'm around for the next 2 days. Feel free. I'd love to.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
We're going to wrap it there, and like Dan said, he'll be around. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Round of applause, please. Thank you. It's just so interesting. It was just so much. Thank you.